Greetings, my name is JC.
And I'm Ian.
And this is the Gamer's Gaiden.
So, 2020, new backdrop?
Yep, new year. But actually...
No, not really.
So we've been having some technical difficulties. It seems like with a lot of testing, and this is like the fourth time that we've gotten together to try and fix this, one of my microphones appears to be dead. It's thankfully not my computer. It's under warranty, so we're going to be using my camera shotgun mic in order to record the audio of this episode. So
hopefully this isn't too bad.
Yeah, great way to start off the year. So in this episode, what we're going to be doing is going over the best of 2019, much like we did with the best of the decade, but instead of going over a bunch of titles, since the decade is 10 years, and this was only one, we're going to be going over one title of each of the different genres. So without further ado, let's get into it. Ian, what was your favorite indie game of the year?
So I'm going to break the rules immediately.
Okay, that's fair.
And I had two.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, my favorite indie game of the year was the Untitled Goose Game.
Yeah.
Everything about this game was beautiful. I loved the level design, the sound design, music, even the controls. Everything about this game was just magical. You know, you get to be a goose doing what a goose does, and you terrorize this pleasant little what seems to be like an English village.
Mm-hmm.
I know the team was from New Zealand that made this.
Yep.
But it very much looks like a quaint English village.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's a single player experience, it was a lot of fun to play with a room full of people.
Yeah.
You know, getting everyone's kind of reaction to what the goose can do,
mm-hmm.
how the goose can really, really harass these people. And it was just as much fun to throw the controller in someone's hand and see how evil they would go with the goose.
Yeah.
Like
geese are pretty evil, so...
There's a small child in the second level,
mm-hmm.
and man, I saw that kid get terrorized frequently between like untying his shoelaces, chasing him around, honking at him. It has a dedicated honk button. More games need a dedicated honk button. I did want to give a special shout out to Slay the Spire.
Alright.
Because I thought like it kind of fit into the same genres that I would have put the Untitled Goose Game, and the Goose Game was it was way up here.
Right.
You know, I've been waiting for this since 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Slay the Spire I think was in early access last year,
mm-hmm.
but did get its full release in 2019.
Yep.
So technically it's a 2019 game, and the way they combined like a roguelike as well as a deck building game, I thought was just perfect. You know, every time playing through would be completely different. You couldn't rely on the same strategies. For those who don't know, Slay the Spire, basic premise, you start off with a deck of, I believe, 12 cards, and you go through various levels. Sometimes they're just a text-based room where you'll get to make a decision. Others are combat encounters. There's a treasure chest, which will give you like a relic, which will change the way you play the game. And there are a shop, like a little merchant, that you can buy new cards, relics, and potions from. And you basically go through 3 and then eventually a 4th level to try to slay the spire.
That's cool. Yeah, I find that the deck building games are always fun to play because every experience is different, right? So you will get a different set of cards every single time you play, and that will sort of force you to change your strategy a bit, which gives the game a lot of replayability versus other games in comparison. And
and you've got 3 different classes that you can choose from that you unlock as you go through,
mm-hmm.
and each of them is drastically different. They have a completely different play style and a completely different starting deck. So it's wonderful.
Cool.
So JC, what was your pick of the year?
My best indie game of 2019 was Lost Ember. So this game was kind of an interesting game in its premise because there's an ancient civilization that believes that whenever you pass on, you go to the City of Light. And some people who don't make it to the City of Light are either lost embers, which are like lost spirits or souls, and others get outcast into beasts. And this story is adventure of both wild beast who has the ability to basically essence transfer into other animals, such as like fish or birds or other land dwelling creatures. And there's this lost ember, and the lost ember believes that they should have made it to the City of Light and they might be lost on their way. So you kind of help each other out, and you're going through different areas, and some of them are very, very vast and large, in trying to basically discover potentially why the one spirit wasn't to discover like why the spirit was cast out from the City of Light, and like what happened in the past. And the really neat thing about it is there's these different locations that you basically uncover, and their memories, and whenever you go there you get these memories from these two different people, a daughter and a father, and it kind of tells a story of their late life and what they did in their life. And it basically is a journey of experiencing kind of what happened in these people's lives and how it affected other people and themselves and stuff like that. And I just thought it was a really, really cool experience. I enjoyed going into the different various types of animals to solve like different types of puzzles to like get to different locations and stuff like that. But most of it was basically just a lot of exploration and storytelling. And a really cool aspect of this game as well is that a lot of the feedback of the game's engine of just the exploration and stuff like that and going into the different animals, a lot of players were like, why isn't this game in VR? It should be in VR. And the developers actually were like, actually, you know what? You're kind of right. Like, we should make this in VR. So they're actually making and working on a patch currently to make the PC version VR compatible, and they've mentioned that they're going to look into making a PSVR compatibility of for this game as well, which would be really, really cool. So it will bring life to the game again. I think that people will be able to experience this game again in a VR format.
So is this like first person or third person?
It's a third person game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what did you play it on?
I played it on the GOG actually.
Okay, so because you don't have the like a Vive or anything.
No, I have PSVR.
But would you consider buying this again on the PlayStation?
Yeah, certainly. If there was a VR version on the PlayStation, I would repurchase it and replay through it again.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So let's go into the next genre, RPG. And I'll start off with this category since...
That's kind of your jam.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to hear what your pick for the year was.
Yeah, so it might be a surprise to some people that I know, but the game I've decided to select with this is Greedfall. And the reason why is because if you're a fan of old BioWare games and kind of the way that they design games and made games in the past, and I'm talking like... the Neverwinter and Star Wars game and like the early Dragon Age and Mass Effect games, where there's a really grand epic story and there's like relationships in the game and a lot of NPCs and a lot of dialogue and just great RPG mechanics that aren't too technical and bogged down like some are. Greedfall is probably going to be up your alley. It's kind of like a colonialism theme, which is kind of interesting, and it has some mysticism in it as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like a touch of fantasy in there, right?
Yeah, and it's just a really interesting game. I've watched a few people play it for a few hours. I know a friend who's also beaten it, and really enjoyed it, and I've played it a little bit, and enough to basically tell that this is definitely the RPG that I'm enjoying the most out of which came out in 2019. So Greedfall is on my list. Your best RPG of the year, Ian?
I gotta give it to Fire Emblem Three Houses.
Yeah, you really enjoyed this game.
I really did. It's it takes a lot for me to sink 90 hours into a game. And I sunk 90 hours into this game.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I loved that everything was broken up. I mean, it's basically like a it's almost like a visual novel with the relationship building in that, and then you've also got like a really competent strategy game as well. So, you know, it takes a lot of the elements of other Fire Emblem games. You know, they did remove some of them, but I thought the fact that it was a very competent story, told very well, and that you have multiple options, because there's 3 major paths, and then one path does deviate a little bit.
Yeah, into 2 possible different endings, so 4 in total.
Yeah, you've got 4 potential endings to this game.
Right.
So
which gives it a lot of replayability, especially since each path, once you start into that path, is very different. So
it's true, and you actually lock out some potential companions based on which path you go.
Yeah, because they might be more of one house versus another.
Exactly.
And you will be meeting them in the battlefield rather than meeting in the hall.
No, really, and like that was kind of a neat thing too. Is like, the less people you spend time befriending before the little time jump, that's not a spoiler, you'll actually have to potentially fight them later.
Yeah.
So it is worth your while to spend that time making those relationships and those connections so that you don't have to have an extra enemy to fight later on, right? You know, to make it harder for yourself. And a lot of the other Fire Emblem games only had the, like, hardcore mode, I guess, where if you lost a party member, they were gone. Yeah, they actually added in a easy mode essentially in this. So you know, you could play through and be able to have everybody and not worry about losing that party member, because that's one of those things that I hate the most. I just wanted the story. I wanted to get all those connections. Right. And if I want to go back, maybe I'll try it in the higher difficulty. Well, not higher difficulty, but that I could potentially lose people. Right. But cool. That's my 2 cents. Next up, we have one of my favorite genres, kind of, action. JC, this was kind of interesting because you weren't sure what your favorite action game was, and I said, dude, didn't you play a bunch of this? And you're like, oh yeah.
Let's put that on the list. So that game is Blazing Chrome.
From a dude who loves Contra.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I don't know if there's any action games I like this year. What about that one that's like a really good Contra?
Yeah. The reason why is because I kind of consider like action adventure kind of the same genre, especially with like the Uncharted and Tomb Raider style games. Like I might consider them an action game, but they're also an adventure game. But anyway, Blazing Chrome is definitely an action game. If you're a fan of Contra or a fan of run and gun games with a lot of different options and a couple different playable characters, this is the
giant robot with a mohawk.
Yeah, giant robot with a mohawk. Yeah, he's pretty cool, and it's got 4 different levels that you can do at the very start. In any order that you want. Each of them have its own kind of theme. One of them has jetpacks, one of them has hover bikes, both of them have running sections where you're gunning. One of them is kind of like an elevator level. And
they kind of hit all the tropes, don't they?
Yeah, they really do. And it's just non-stop action after action. I will say that if you're not used to these style games, like if you found Cuphead hard, this will also be hard, but for different reasons.
Yeah, I was not good at this game.
And
but it's a banging soundtrack.
Yeah, it is. And the cool thing about Blazing Chrome as well is its difficulty levels, because the easy difficulty is still difficult enough, but what it does is it at least trains you to understand the patterns of the different types of monsters and when they come in, and then it just basically it doubles the enemies. It makes them harder. It adds in different enemies in certain parts in the next difficulty and stuff like that, so that you can work up to being better at the game, so that you don't need to be completely dumbfounded if you're playing on normal and you just don't get it. Play it on an easier difficulty. You'll learn the patterns a lot easier because you don't have as much to manage of what's coming at you, and then you'll probably be able to play on a normal difficulty. But yeah, Blazing Chrome, awesome game. Your game for action, Ian?
You know what? My game for action, it's going to be Death Stranding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting because what you mentioned before, how action adventure is kind of the same thing, but we did split them apart just because there are some things that are way more just adventure.
Yeah.
And this really, Death Stranding is a lot of adventure, but there's a good element of action to it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a nice sort of a mix of the both. And Yeah.
Because you've been putting a lot of hours into this game lately.
I've sunk a ton of hours into this. Not quite Fire Emblem levels yet, but
Every time I log onto my PlayStation, I see Ian playing this game.
I've probably put a good 30 hours into it, and yeah, I love everything about this game. You know, it's Kojima at his best. Everybody was concerned of what you know, Kojima Unbound would cause. And yeah, like it's beautiful. If you've watched any of the trailers, like all of the trailers, they look like nonsense, absolute nonsense. But I have seen...
It's hard to tell what they were advertising for. So.
It's true, but the thing is, I've seen all of those scenes that they strung together to make the trailers in-game so far.
Right.
And it's weird because everything that sounds so crazy all makes sense at this point.
Okay.
And yeah, like you have these like huge beautiful vistas that you get to explore, but you also have the tension between the BTs, like the ghosty things that you have to sneak around and can actually fight a little bit, as well as the mules who are like kind of pirates.
Right. So you were actually saying that one of your favorite part about this game is the persistent world. Do you want to explain a little bit on how that works?
Yeah, so basically when you go into a new section and you bring that section online, this is not a spoiler, you actually get to see things that other players have built in the environment.
Right. You don't see the other players, you just see what they've built.
Exactly.
Right.
You can see the things that they put into the environment, and it just makes it that much easier to traverse through it. And I think that's one of the reasons why this reviewed so poorly at the gate, is because a lot of the reviewers didn't have access to that stuff. And I think playing through it either offline or like without that, you're going to have a completely different experience. Now, I will be doing a review video on this, and I will go super into it. You can listen to me ramble about this forever, but we do have a lot more to get into, so let's get into adventure. JC, what was your favorite adventure game?
So, my favorite adventure game of 2019 is A Plague Tale: Innocence, which is kind of funny because we talked about this in an earlier episode, and you had mentioned
this was something that I was kind of looking forward to, and then you're like, I feel like I've heard of that game. And then I think you actually had like pre-ordered it.
I did. It came in the mail the next day.
And I never played it.
Yeah, and so Plague Tale: Innocence was my favorite adventure game of this year. It was really cool, set in the kind of the Inquisition era of France, and it's basically about a sister and her brother. Their family was attacked, they run away from home, and they're just basically trying to find this, at the beginning they're just trying to find this one person for a safe haven, and the Inquisitor is essentially chasing them the entire time, and it's got a really cool element story there, of that entire sort of build-up of their family bond and stuff like that. The little kid does get annoying sometimes, but he's a little kid, right? Like he's like 8 or something. I would expect that.
Yeah, that's a lot to process for an 8-year-old.
Yeah, and there is some like mysticism in the game that's a little far-fetched. Like there's like mounds of rats that like call them up and then attack you and stuff like that, which is, you know, it's fantasy aspects, but it's not that over the top that it's kind of hindering the experience. But it was a really, really cool story. If you enjoy games like Tomb Raider or Uncharted and you want something that's kind of along the same vein but totally different, but the same kind of like game style, this is definitely a game that you should consider looking into. Your favorite adventure game for the year, Ian?
Untitled Goose Game.
Fair enough.
This was just way too much fun. Yeah. I love the crap out of this. You already heard me ramble on about it for a good 5 minutes. But, I mean, exploring this village was just wonderful. You know, everything about this, every transition from level to level was just awesome. Even the brief section of the goose traveling through a house was just... That might be, like... 20 seconds of my favorite gameplay all year. You see none of it, you just hear all of it.
Oh, okay.
And I think it sums up perfectly what the experience of a goose going through someone's house unexpectedly would be.
Right.
So if you haven't played it still, play it. That's 2 recommendations in this episode from me. So let's move on to the next one, which is platformers. Now this is, again, your jam. You're a platform kind of guy.
Yeah, so I would be giving this to Gris, but Gris actually came out in December of 2018, so for me it doesn't qualify on this list, but that would be the game that's
We were January to December.
Yeah, and we mentioned it's a game that we were going to play and likely would have been on our decade list. It is definitely now on the decade list.
100%.
But yeah, because you've played it now too. And
yeah, with a game with no dialogue to have
Yeah.
such a strong emotional response.
Yeah. But we're going to be doing an
Yeah, we'll
entire
do a full
episode
episode
on
on
this in a couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that.
Yes.
But the best platformer of 2019, in my opinion, is the new Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. I've mentioned this a few times in this series. I just really like the 2.5D 2D Mario formula. This basically takes that formula from Mario 3 and Super Mario World, and it just continues on that. If you've played the Wii U version of this, this is a little bit more enhanced. I believe it added in more levels, and it also did a bunch of cool things, and it was really, really entertaining and fun. If you like platformers, this is a game that you should definitely check out.
Yeah, even I had a really good time with this.
Yeah, I asked you to get some footage for me because I didn't have any time. And
Yeah, you're like, I just need 5 minutes, and I think I gave you like 2 hours.
Yeah, I was like, do like 3 levels, and it was like you did
No,
an entire world.
Yeah, I did like 2 worlds.
Yeah. Yeah, but what was your favorite platformer of the year, Ian?
So, kind of an action game, but it's got jumping, so I'm going to count it.
Mm-hmm.
Katana Zero.
Fair enough.
It was a fantastic, like, side-scrolling version of Hotline Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I loved the aesthetic of the game, how it's kind of cyberpunk,
Right.
but you also play like a samurai, sort of, because he is just wearing a bathrobe.
Yeah.
Which they reference a bunch of times. It's got a lot of wonderful dialogue. And yeah, really fair. This is more of an action game. I get it.
Platformers are also actions.
It has
That's
jumping.
the hard thing about these lists is that we talked about multi-genres in one of the previous episodes, and almost every game is multi-genre, to be honest with you.
It really
so,
is.
Yeah, it's like very like rare that a game is only one genre.
So what I really like about Katana Zero is that they took one gameplay element.
Mm-hmm.
They took that time slow mechanic, and they just almost master it, and they really play well with it.
Right.
You get into a lot of situations where, because you're constantly rerunning through these levels, and
Yep.
a lot of times your first time through, you're using that time slow mechanic
Mm-hmm.
to knock these bullets back at enemies, or to make that throw or make that jump.
Right.
But then you're getting the timing
Mm-hmm.
as you're failing further through, and you get the timing down. So as you progress through it, you don't use the time slow mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of helps you into like being good.
Right.
It's like giving you an easy mode, and then like now I'm better,
Mm-hmm.
and you can just kind of run through it. So again, more of an action game, but I don't care. This is our show. I'm calling it a platformer. I loved it. Moving on, best narrative game. This is going to be no surprise to anybody.
Probably not.
But I don't know how, because that game came out in like 2016.
Okay. So the best one of 2019 was Life is Strange Season 2.
Oh, that's how. Get around it with seasons.
Yep. Well, they're totally different characters. So, yeah, I enjoyed playing this game probably the most out of this year, and it wasn't as good as the original Life is Strange in my opinion, but
Okay.
I did have a really great time playing it. The really cool thing about the Life is Strange Season 2 was, in my opinion, that of course, yeah, it's narrative and it's story, but this actually has 7 endings.
Wow.
And which is interesting. They actually posted on their YouTube page all the endings so that you could see them. Because it is kind of hard to get some of them. Because you'd have to like play through multiple different times, and the whole entire story is about 2 brothers, Daniel and Sean. And their father gets murdered. So whenever their father dies, Daniel's power gets activated. I guess if you want a superpower, watch somebody get shot. According to the Life is Strange universe.
Yeah, apparently.
Apparently, but so they they react sort of poorly and they sort of run away from the situation after the cop gets killed by Daniel's power, and then they try and make it across the border, and it's the adventure of them essentially meeting a bunch of people on their way to try and cross the border. Some people help them, some people are trying to help them but not help them cross the border, but they're like trying to help them because they're like there's a federal agent woman who's like a child custody person, I think, and I don't know what her official title was, I forget, but yeah, and like you meet their grandparents and a bunch of other things.
Well, that's kind of cool.
What's really neat is basically as the character you play as is Sean, and you basically select how to bring up Daniel, and you make different reactions to what he's doing, and then he basically will either not care if he kills people, or he will be very concerned if he kills like who he feels is good, but not necessarily care if he kills cops, or he won't want to kill anybody, and you can basically really affect the upbringing and the reaction to your brother's reaction to basically life and the world itself in general, and that will affect your end to the point where you might decide to do one thing at the end, and then your brother all of a sudden says like, no, we're going across the border. It's really neat how the entire narrative of the game, of you selecting all your different options, basically helps adhere your ending to one of seven different potential ones. Some of them are very similar, yes, but then it's kind of like more of a neutral side of the same ending, so to speak. Like something small is tweaked. Like there's both of them get across the border, one of them gets across the border, the other one gets across the border, both of them don't. Many different possible endings, and it's not something that you can just switch at the end like the first game where it's bay or bay. This can potentially have an effect based off of what you want to do, which is really, really cool, and I wish that they actually did this in the first game. I'm glad that they did, and I'm really looking forward to their next game. Ian, your favorite narrative game of the year?
Mine was After Party.
This is definitely my second.
It was a lot of fun. We did a whole video on it, so I'm not going to go way into it. If you really want to know thoughts on it, go back, watch that video. But yeah, I mean, very kind of brief. It was just a very enjoyable time. I really loved the conclusion. I mean, we both had separate endings.
Yeah.
But I was really happy with the way both ended. I loved the characters in this. I really enjoyed a game that had a male and female lead that were not in any way romantically involved. There was no romantic subtext.
And they do comment on it, one section where they make a comment like, oh, whatever, you guys are just like romantically involved, and then they're just like, what? No, we're just really good friends.
Yeah, it was refreshing and a lot of fun. So that was mine, After Party. Let's move on into puzzle. These are all JC games. Like, when do we get to Ian games? Puzzle games. So, JC.
Well, you played a pretty good puzzle game this year.
I did.
Yeah.
I was bad at it, but I loved it.
Box Boy and Box Girl for the Switch. This is kind of a new game from the original Box Boy, which is on the 3DS, if I'm not mistaken. But this one had a bunch of worlds, a bunch of different levels. It was really, there's different boxes. There's actually like 3 different ones. There's a rectangle and then the Box Boy and Box Girl that you can be.
Okay.
And yeah, it was just a lot of fun. The puzzles were really cool because they took the previous mechanics and built on them so that you kind of had to... it wasn't like just a different mechanic every single one without having to use your previous mechanics. Some of them you didn't have to use and stuff like that, but it would kind of cycle through them all and forced you to use like a couple at the same time and stuff like that. And if you really like puzzle games that in platforming aesthetic, then this is definitely a game for you, and I would highly recommend checking it out. So yeah, Box Boy and Box Girl. Your puzzle game for the year?
Baba Is You.
Yeah.
I think it might have even been the only puzzle game I played this year.
Potentially.
So it's not like it had a lot of competition, but it was still really fun.
Yeah.
I loved the fact that you're basically just trying to break the game. You're trying to find a way to change the rules of the game to make a win condition that you can achieve.
Right.
So I really liked that. It felt like very, very simple programming,
Mm-hmm.
and it also really forced you to think hard outside of the box.
Right.
What was even better was that you could go back and redo levels at like a harder difficulty. They would actually change some of the scenery.
Oh, okay.
So you had to figure out a new way to solve that old problem.
Mm-hmm.
So
Gives it some replayability.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there was a ton of levels anyways.
Right.
So for a game that made me feel incredibly stupid, this game was awesome. Yeah, if
Fair
you want
enough.
to know exactly how smart you are, check out Baba Is You.
Yeah. Let's go on to the next genre, though. First-person shooter.
Yes, an Ian game.
Yeah, so I'll start since mine's quick, though. So I don't believe I really played any good ones that were released in this year.
I disagree.
But you did, so go ahead.
We both did. Wolfenstein Youngblood.
Alright.
I really had fun with this game. I had so much fun with this game. I did have fun playing on my own, but I had a lot of fun playing with my friend JC, who apparently didn't have as good of a time.
It was entertaining in the fact that it was the multiplayer co-op, but I don't know, the game seemed a little monotonous. It was just more of the same to me, and I really disliked the characters. They just seemed like two gender-swapped teenage boys to me. So
Yeah, they were like a lady version of
They're
Beavis and Butthead.
very poorly written, in my opinion.
I don't know. I thought they were a lot of fun. I thought they were just two huge dorks. You know, they had their own, like, they were very much twins. They had their own language. The dorky, like, Hardy Boys parody that they kept referencing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with this. You know, it wasn't the only shooter that I played this year, but I probably had the most fun playing this.
Fair enough.
So, Wolfenstein Youngblood.
Fair enough.
Strategy games.
Strategy games. Do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I'll go first. Wargroove was mine.
Mm-hmm. You still play this from time to time.
I do still play this from time to time. That's another thing about this, is that it has an amazing online community
Right.
of people who are still making levels and new content for this. So
Mhm.
even though I think there's been a few patches and updates
Yeah.
that have come out, but there's a very active community making patches for this or making new levels for this constantly. But it's more or less a fantasy version of Advance Wars,
That's true.
which,
Is more of the great thing. So
yeah, Advance Wars was great. This is wonderful. I love that each of the hero units is very different from the other ones.
Right.
So you do really have to change your tactics and strategy.
Mhm.
Plus, there's a really big risk reward, because in any of the levels, if your hero unit dies, that's it.
Right.
You got to start over
Game
again.
over.
Yeah,
Mhm.
there's
Reload.
so some of the hero units that are more attack based and close combat,
Mm-hmm.
who you have to throw up there, or else you're really wasting their potential.
Yep.
You're really like weighing that, like, okay, I'll kill this unit, but is there anything that's going to be in range that's going to kill me? Like, is this worthwhile? How much of this can I clear out?
Mhm.
So yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. There's a lot of depth to this game, and yeah, a very enjoyable story as well. Plus, it has a dog hero who does nothing.
Oh, okay. Doesn't even bring you supplies or anything?
The dog hero, no, he has an inspiring bark
Oh, okay.
that lets people act again, but his attack is two other people coming and attacking for him,
Oh, okay.
because he's just a wonderful guy.
Fair enough.
But what was your favorite strategy game?
So an expansion pack actually for the Sudden Strike 4 series called the Pacific War. The Sudden Strike series came out a couple of years ago, and they keep on releasing new content to it. There's actually a complete collection that was released if you want to go through and play it all, but the one that they released this year was kind of its own full campaign of both the Axis and the Allies in the Pacific War, where you play through as America or as the Japanese soldiers during World War II, and it was a really awesome experience. They added in one naval level per side, which is kind of cool, where you get
Nice.
to control an aircraft carrier and destroyers and some frigates, and it's just really neat. They also added in flame units, because that was a really big aspect of some of the Sino-American conflict on the islands and stuff like that, and it was just a really, really fun experience. It's a game where you can play it live, and you can also hit the spacebar to pause and micromanage a little bit more if you're more of a fan of that type of style like I am. I like micromanaging my infantry in these style of games and tanks and things like that. And yeah, it's a pretty good challenge, and I felt that the battles that I played through, especially as the Americans and trying to fight through the cave systems that the Japanese were in where they fought to the last man, definitely felt like it was an overwhelming power and force, just like it's kind of explained in the textbooks and movies and things like that. So it kind of got the cool right feeling in most of these maps, like the previous ones as well, and it's just a really great strategy game experience. So, yeah, the Pacific War and the Sudden Strike 4 series. So let's go into the next genre, which is horror game. And we actually have the same one for this one.
I'll be honest, I kind of struggled with this because I was like, man, did I even really play any horror games this year?
You did at the
I
beginning.
played a bunch of horror games this year, but none that were from this year. And then I was like, oh yeah, there was one that I played, so I guess I'll give it to this one.
Fair enough. You're acting as if it's not that great of a game.
Resident Evil 2 Remake.
Yeah.
You know what? No, it is fantastic. This is amazing.
Mm-hmm. My favorite part about this game is that they took an already amazing game and they didn't necessarily just make it better, but they made it its own experience, and it's just as good. You can play the original game and have a great experience with it, and you can play the new game and also have a great experience with it. And they're both the same stories in the same areas, and they're kind of like...
You know what? They're similar stories.
Yeah.
Like, it
There's
is the
some
same
new added
areas,
aspects
but
and stuff
it's
like that.
similar stories.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing that is kind of a bummer is that your A and B story are kind of very much the same.
Yeah, there's some areas where you go to that you don't have with the other character, especially with Leon and Ada Wong. You don't really do as much of that with Claire's story. And
yeah, but like overall, like when you play the A and B
mm-hmm.
in the original, like they are very much, you can see like, oh, okay, like this is what's going on. Well, this is what, like...
They still have some of that.
A little bit, but there's also a little bit of, like, well, okay, you know, you're crossing over at the same part, or, like, you're fighting against the same boss at the same time, so it's, like...
No,
it's still amazing.
There's
basically, like...
It's like there's a section of this exact same thing, and it branches, and it goes like this. It constantly does that, which is different than the original. But it's not necessarily, like... some of the boss battles are identical. Some of them are not. Some of them you don't actually fight, and the reason why is because you're not actually in that section.
One thing that I do find kind of a bummer
mm-hmm.
is that Mr. X is in it right away.
Right.
Whereas in the original one, he's on your second playthrough.
I don't remember.
Yeah, because this one I do remember, because again, I was listening to something, they're talking about that, and I do not remember Mr. X when I played Resident Evil 2, but that's because I only played through it as Leon on the one save.
Oh, okay.
And when I went back and did it with Claire, it was on like a different memory card at someone else's house.
Oh, okay.
So it was like, I had basically the same experience, but yeah, I played through like Leon A and then Claire A instead of like Claire B.
Oh, okay.
Which I think that's when he shows up
okay.
and pursues you through it. Whereas this, it's just like, when I saw him lift up that helicopter, I'm like, who the hell is this bald guy?
Fair enough.
The only thing that I find kind of a bummer is that Mr. X shows up right away, because that stressed me out the entire time.
Right.
Like, I was just... I put this game down almost immediately after he showed up.
Oh, okay.
I was like, okay, I need a minute. And then, like, hearing his footsteps, and then, like, having to sneak around so that he doesn't follow you, and then, like, running into a bunch of stuff that you're like, okay, now I gotta run, because I can't shoot these things, because I don't have any ammo, because this is Resident Evil.
Right.
But this is beautiful, and it's just so well done.
Yeah.
You know, they really took their time and dedicated so much to this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Resident Evil remake that they did, like...
The remaster? Like, for the original?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a high-def remaster.
It was really good, too. Like, that was so well done.
But it was the exact same game, just, like
yeah.
the reskinned, basically.
Yeah, it made it look way more pretty. And this is just, like, so much beyond that.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the third one. Though I wish they'd rather be doing, like, Code Veronica or a different game, but...
Yeah, I'm a little concerned that the third one... Like, not to get too in the weeds about this, but I'm concerned that the third one might be a little bit samey. Because they did really lean into the Mr. X chasing you around. And that's kind of the big element of Resident Evil 3 is Nemesis chasing you about. But I'm excited for the cool things that they can do with it now. So, horror.
Yep. So let's move on to best VR title. So my favorite VR title that was released this year is Beat Saber, a game that I've gone over quite a few times over the show. It's really enjoyable experience. It's kind of the game that is... if you've never played VR, this is probably one of those games that you should try, because it's...
Star Wars Guitar Hero?
I guess. With a mix of... Yeah, it's like Guitar Hero, Dance Dance Revolution with the different arrows. But yeah, like, anybody can really get into this. You don't have to be an action fan. Sure, it's a rhythm game, but it's more applicable for kind of a general audience, sort of. And if you've never played it before, I highly recommend getting over to somebody's place that has it, or getting it yourself if you have a VR headset. And yeah, Beat Saber. It's a really great game, and I hope that they bring out more and more music. They just did the Green Day pack, which is promising to me, because that hopefully means to me that they'll do other releases of well-known artists as well, kind of like they used to do with Guitar Hero and Rock Band. So if they start doing that, then it'll help keep the life of the game out there and continually being played, instead of something that's sort of isn't played anymore.
I think on the PC it has a little bit more of more of a community.
Yeah, it does, because you have the custom made games, but I have heard that some of them are kind of nonsensical, because they're just made by people that don't really know what they're doing, and either they're just like complete nonsense, and they're just, unless you know what you're supposed to do, it's kind of
like way too hard or way too easy.
Or it's done by an algorithm, it's just way too easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that Beat Saber is my favorite VR game of the year. Yours, Ian?
Blood and Truth. Yeah, this was hands down the best VR experience I had this year. I played a bunch of VR games this year too.
Yeah, you did.
And yeah, this was like, what I see here is where I hope that they go with the medium. Like, I would almost rather something like this than watching a movie.
Yeah, it's basically a completely interactive cinematic experience, which is really neat.
Yeah, like, and this was great.
The technology advances and we get like the gloves and stuff like that, then it'll just become more and more immersive, and this game's even apparently getting a sequel.
It is getting a sequel. I mean, it ends suggesting a sequel, and then it did fantastically, and they are going to actually put out a sequel. But for those who don't know, it's kind of like a like British Mafia sort of.
That's a good way to explain it.
Yeah, if
you like mobster movies, this is definitely
if you like British mobster movies, like if you like Snatch or Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, yeah, this is everything you would really enjoy. Or The Getaway, the old PS2 game.
Right.
This reminded me a lot of The Getaway, a lot of like similar, I guess, character tropes. So yeah, and actual actors in this too.
Right.
It was really well done. So moving on, best remake.
Yeah, or re-release, and we actually have the same game on this as well.
We do.
I had a different game on here, and I was like, oh, I think that it should be going over to Resident Evil, actually. And then I was thinking about it, and I saw what you put on the list, and you made a comment to me, and I'm actually, you know what, I did enjoy Link's Awakening a lot more.
Oh, this is so good!
Yeah, I love this game. It's probably one of the best remakes that I've experienced in a long time. It's just... It took a great Game Boy game that a lot of people who didn't necessarily have a Game Boy had access to it, so they don't
Yeah.
really know this game. And a lot of the handheld Legend of Zeldas are fantastic games.
Yeah.
This game did pretty successfully well, and it was a great experience and just a fun all-around game. What has me the most excited about this game is that since it did do so well, then they have kind of like the template to possibly do some more of the different Game Boy transitions, especially the Zelda Seasons and Ages ones. I really enjoyed those two Game Boy games as well, and a lot of people didn't really get to experience those, and if they redid them, I think it would basically do the game just as much justice as Link's Awakening, and hopefully that is something that comes in the future. But
well, this was great. Like this almost could have been one of my best games. Period. It was my first time playing Link's Awakening because I didn't have a Game Boy when I was younger.
Right.
I didn't get one until much later, and Zelda games haven't really been my thing necessarily. I've played a bunch of them, but this is the one that like it hooked me right away.
Yeah.
And I stuck with it. You know, I loved this.
Right.
Like this was fantastic. I thought the dungeons were really well done, and the character models too.
Yeah.
Like I love how
cool,
everything looks like
little
toys.
toys. Yeah.
But it's also focused kind of on the center because the edges of everything have a bit of a blur to it.
Yeah.
And I loved that effect. So yeah, this was incredibly enjoyable. Best remake / remaster, Link's Awakening.
So let's go on to the last two things for this episode, and we're going to go into the worst game and the best game of the year. So before we get off to the best game, let's start off with the worst game.
What disappointed you the most this year, JC?
Well, let me think about it. It was Anthem. This game is kind of like the flickering out flame of BioWare for me is a good way to put it out, and I am a little worried about Dragon Age 4 because they canceled that game and then restarted it because of this game, which I think was a bad decision, and yeah, so good luck to BioWare, and I hope Dragon Age 4, which I will pre-order and I will play, is good, but you done fucked it up, I guess, but yeah, I've talked about this game enough throughout this year, and hopefully this is the last time I have to mention it. So, do you want to go on to your game that disappointed you the most?
I mean, I didn't get as hurt about Anthem. I thought it was a pretty competent $20 game. What I didn't think was
it wasn't a competent $120 game. Anyway.
What wasn't a competent $20 game, actually I spent $40, but what wasn't competent was Generation Zero. This game just bummed me out. I was so excited for this at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, because you actually flipped back and forth for this game too. You were disappointed about it, and then you changed your mind, and then you were disappointed about it.
Yeah, like I was really bummed out, and it's just like the first time I played it, I'm like, man, there's so many games that are so much better than this. I actually went out and bought whatever the latest Far Cry was, New Dawn.
Yeah. And
I played that instead because it was more or less the same mechanics, but just done way better.
Right.
And then, a friend of mine convinced me, like, hey, let's give Generation Zero another chance. We had a game session. It was a lot of fun, but I think it was just because I was playing with somebody else. Because I went back and started playing on my own.
That's a tricky thing, is to realize, like, games are fun playing them with your friends, obviously, and that can kind of, like, cover up a lot of the game's flaws, and sometimes it just sucks.
And this was really just disappointing. When I went back and gave it another go by myself, thinking like, oh, it's not. There was so much better they could have done, and there's been so much better done in the same like vein.
Yeah, don't enter in a space if you're not going to do better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, Generation Zero. Thanks for coming out, but pass.
Alright, so let's get on to the best of the year.
Ba-ba-da-ba.
Ian?
Death Stranding.
Alright.
This game's great. Watch my video in a couple weeks.
Fair enough.
JC?
My choice is Life is Strange Season 2. Probably to nobody's surprise, and I will also be doing an episode about this game. So keep your eye open out for both of those. We kind of already went over why we like them specifically in this episode, so we won't go into more detail about them. But
And we're gonna go real
games.
deep.
And yeah, we'll go deeper into the reasons as to more of a review, formal review into some upcoming episodes. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, sorry about the technical difficulties. Be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already. And
what was your favorite game of the year?
Yeah,
let us know down in the comments.
All right, we'll see you next time.